Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined by Tom Midler from the Other Bundesliga Podcast. Tom, it's great to have you on. How are you doing?
Yeah, really well, thanks. It's been a bit overdue that we've got the Other Bundesliga here on the pod, so I'm delighted to be here. And
Before we kick things off, Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the podcast that you do?
Yeah, so, the Other Bundesliga has been going strong for just over 5 years now. There's three of us in Austria who run it. We all live out here. We're all British guys who work in football in one way or another. There's translators, there's writers, there's commentators. I do quite a lot of commentary for various clubs and various leagues. And we decided that covering the football that was near to us is something that was important to us and not just looking out for games elsewhere in perhaps bigger leagues. So we got to know the football in Austria and we decided it would be quite cool to get to know the Austrian Bundesliga and sort of share it with people online. And, then we discovered the brilliant online Twitter community as it was before. And just enjoyed sort of posting about our journeys across Austria. It's a lovely country to travel around. There's loads of good, interesting stories, not just in the Austrian Bundesliga. If all you know about Austrian football is Salzburg or Red Bull Salzburg, then there's so much more. Exactly, there's so much more to love in Austrian football. So we've enjoyed sharing that with people and running this pod for the last 5 years, and it's gone from strength to strength, really.
Yeah, no, as I said, you guys are brilliant, and it's amazing seeing all the different things that you do, and to hear that you're involved in commentary and other aspects of the game over there is fantastic. And as an outsider looking in, Austrian football to me kind of falls in the same bracket as Swiss football. Actually, it's a league that doesn't get the attention that it deserves, and some of the football that's played is absolutely amazing, and the country's beautiful as well. But of course, with that, and on the other side of things, there's also a number of teams with a litany of problems, and that kind of dribs down the league quite a bit. And again, we'll come on to talk about that later. But the club that we're going to be discussing today, first of all, is a club that is currently still in existence and still going up the leagues. We're going to be talking about Grazer AK or GAK. Of course, Grazer existed from around 1902, so a very, very long time ago. But then in the 2006-07 season, they went into administration. Were you following Austrian football at that point, Tom?
No, I mean, I was aware of Austrian football to some extent. My early interactions, I suppose, with Austrian football involved like 90s Champions League games. I was living in the UK back in those days, and I remember the names like Manchester United, I think, playing against Rapid Vienna, and Sturm Graz came up as well. So the big city rivals of GAK, they came up. It's the kind of the TV billings in the UK for the Champions League midweek. It's like, oh, this team against Sturm Graz, and it sounds so exciting when you're that age. You're like, wow. When you've got no idea where Graz is or what Vienna is and what Rapid Vienna is, these clubs sound really glamorous and really cool. So that was my first sort of interactions with Austrian football. And then when I ended up over here a little bit later on, then you're sort of looking out for the clubs. You're like, oh, I'm in the city where, I'm in Salzburg. I've heard of Casino Salzburg. Let's go and sort of find out what's going on here. But I didn't know anything about GAK until about 2005, and even then it was nothing really. So all of my knowledge has come in the last decade since I've been living here.
Brilliant. Well, GAK, they were founded as a kind of informal football association for local academics around a medical student by the name of George August Wagner, who was actually from Prague, and he later became a professor at Charles University and the Charité in Berlin. He actually organised the very first public match in present-day Austria in 1894 in the Graz Municipal Park. So he's very much at the heart of everything going on in football in Austria, which I find absolutely incredible. I really like these stories about the kind of early pioneers of the game, if you like, and they become involved in these clubs. And you often find that a lot of the clubs that were formed a very long time ago are some of the ones that first ended up becoming defunct, which is a real shame and really, really sad. But they modelled their wider sport club around Vienna AC, and then they were established officially 8 years later on the 72nd birthday of Emperor Francis Joseph. So they were probably most well known for their exploits in Europe in the 60s and the 80s. They were involved in quite a few European competitions. The first one was against Odense in the Cup Winners' Cup in 1962, and it made kind of regular appearance in and amongst European Cups since then, and UEFA Cup appearances and things like that to come a little bit more into the present day. Their last appearance in Europe was a 5-0 away defeat to Strasbourg in round one of the UEFA Cup in the 05-06 season, the season that everything, the wheels started to come off. And, eventually they went into administration, they were docked 28 points, and they weren't allowed to participate in any of the professional leagues. And they were eventually relegated to the Austrian Regional League Central Division. So is that, just so that I know for myself, Tom, is that the amateur leagues in Austria? Is it similar to the DFB in Germany, where the regional Liga is sort of semi-professional, kind of professional? Are the waters kind of muddied around that?
These days, it's very much the top two divisions that are the only professional ones. And then the third division is a mostly amateur mix. There's lots of different third division tiers, if you know what I mean. Well, one tier, third tier, but lots of different leagues within that tier across the country. So the top two are the only national professional leagues. So everything below that, even in the third tier, to be honest, is mostly completely amateur. There's a few clubs that have sort of semi-professionals at that level. I mean, they're acting in a semi-professional way, I suppose, because you're playing football as if it's a professional sport, but they're completely working. So in that sense, it's kind of entirely amateur, but with all the dedication of a professional sport. So the most difficult of the two mixes. But beyond, when they went all the way down to the 8th tier and stuff. So we were talking like park football, basically.
Yeah, and it's a shame. Thunder struck twice, more or less. They were hit with a second bankruptcy in quick succession, which they actually managed to achieve a settlement for and some accommodation in September 2008, which ensured their survival, which was good. But then the difficulties just kind of kept coming, and they eventually get relegated to the Regional Liga and were dissolved in 2012 because they couldn't really recover from that. But then, pretty much overnight, kind of similar to other clubs we've covered, a Phoenix club was set up and they called themselves Grazer AK, and then they started from the very bottom tier in the 2013-14 season. Was this a big story in Austria at the time, Tom? Was it expected the Grazer would ever make their way back up to the point that they'd been at?
I think you did ask the question at the time, like, are they gonna come back? You never really know. You always think when these big clubs go down that far, there is, of course, a good likelihood that they'll race through the first couple of divisions because they've just got a bigger fan base. They've got that history that other clubs in those levels don't have. The players want to play for them. The best players at those regional levels will all want to play for the formerly big club who's fallen on hard times, because there is a chance to sort of ride the coattails up to the top. But definitely at that time, you mentioned that period, I think between 2007 and 2012, they went bankrupt 4 separate times. It was lurching from one sort of desperate final day settlement to another. It was financial crisis after financial crisis, and they just could not change the model to become profitable or viable again. And unfortunately, this is a bit of a red line that runs through Austrian football in general, because you have to remember, just before that time, that was when they were at their most successful. They were winning leagues, they were winning cups, and of course, you're spending more money at that time. Your output is a lot bigger then too. You've got better contracts for your players. You've got more expenditure on your games and stuff. But at the same time, if you can't become viable when you're having, achieving all the success that you can possibly hope for really in Austrian football, it shows how difficult it is to make money in this country. So yeah, they went down, and I think a lot of people would have expected them to sort of slowly make their way back. Yes. But I'm sure there's a lot of fans who also thought as well, that's it. That's the death of the football club. A new Phoenix club, a new entity. It's not going to be the same. So it is nice to see that they have a little bit of a success story at least as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on there. I mean, as with any club, if you hear the amount of troubles that you're going through, I mean, 4 bankruptcies, it's a huge amount, not something I've seen in any other club before, especially within that short space of time. Then you would imagine that was the end of things, and that was going to be the end. And as you said there, they were an incredibly successful team. I mean, if you're talking about honours, they won the Austrian Bundesliga in the 03-04 season. They've won the Austrian Cup 4 times, the Super Cup twice, and then they've won the divisions before them a number of times as well. And obviously, as they were coming back up, they were achieving kind of back-to-back promotions almost. So it's been an incredible rise back up the table. I mean, in terms of the actual bankruptcy itself, what do you think the reasons were? Was it bad management? Was there anything going on behind the scenes, any drama, so to speak, or was it just a case of they ran out of money and they weren't managing it properly?
I mean, it's hard for me to go into specific details on that kind of thing, actually, because it's a little bit before my time when that started. But what I will say is about it is that it was a huge scandal. It sort of still is. The court cases from the original thing, this is about 15 years ago now.
Hmm.
So it's in one sense a long, long time ago. In another sense, it's not that long ago either. The court cases from that time, the individual proceedings against like specific people who were working there, the people who were in charge of the finances, the people who were literally working in the office, sort of doing the day-to-day typing and like bookkeeping on the computers of the Grazer AK football club, like the court cases haven't all concluded against all of those people. Of course, the owners came under massive scrutiny. They're still in trouble to this day. This is like, it was such a big club. They were the national champions, and then suddenly they were completely bust financially. And yeah, there are a lot of very specific allegations of wrongdoing against people, about dodgy bookkeeping, about dodgy tax deals, like dodgy. There's this kind of national insurance equivalent that you have to pay here, like businesses and private people have to pay your like health insurance and all this stuff like tied into one big bill, and that's really difficult for businesses as well. It's like a sort of second tax style in a way. So there's a lot of allegations that a lot of those things were done badly or done wrong, and I can't really comment specifically because I don't know who did what. Some people are getting away with things who might have done things, and other people are being found guilty of things that potentially they were being pressured into because it was just a normal working environment. They were saying, yeah, just write this off, that's fine, whatever. But we don't know. Like, I've got a whole magazine here. There's a great football magazine called Bellestera, and they did a whole edition not that long ago, like just about GAK and the financial, the wranglings of everything that went on. And I still can say after reading that, that I don't really feel confident speaking in detail about what happened. But I guess one day it will become clear as to sort of who's done it. But certainly you have to look at bad management because it was a successful period. I think they risked a lot thinking that they could carry on. And then at some point, even though the club was still doing well, they realized like the foundations that they've been working on financially just had eroded underneath them. And then probably the difficult time then was saying, what can we do now? They didn't want to give up straight away. They, as I said, they lurched from disaster to disaster because they were desperately trying to hold on to something which essentially just wasn't viable anymore. And maybe in that case there were panic sets in. You don't give everything publicly as maybe you should. You don't say, hey, look, this is the reality of how bad the finances are. You sort of try and come up with an excuse and say, no, it's not as bad as it looks. And there were so many different moving parts involved, but surely bad management of some kind is the cause of this.
For sure. I mean, it sounds like it. I mean, if you look at clubs like Palermo, one of the other teams that we covered from Italy, because they forgot to hand in a bill for their insurance, or they forgot to hand in one bit of paperwork, and people said they were looking to make an example of them. CF Reis as well, one of the earlier clubs we covered, who were killed by La Liga, and who a lot of people think there was a lot of politics behind that. Something similar happened to them as well. Barcelona owed them money, other teams owed them money for loads of players, and if they had that money, they would have actually survived. So it's not surprising that these court cases are still going on. And you do wonder if any of the people involved will actually ever be charged for it in the end. If they've gone on this long, then, they could go on for a lot longer.
Yeah, I mean, people are getting fined with things. People are, it doesn't sound like it was one of those cases where they were just really, really unlucky. It does seem to be a more sort of fundamental just lack of money. But the sympathy, I guess, comes from the fact that maybe the prize money here isn't enough. If you get ideas above your station, they sort of took a gamble, I guess, on they stay in the big time, they'll start making money from European competitions and things. And it was such thin ice financially for all Austrian clubs back then. It's still not much better today, to be honest, but I think clubs are a little bit more wary of that. But even if you look in the Bundesliga today, the story of what's happened to Grazer AK could be not the same situation. It's like an ever-present threat for Austria Vienna right now, and Austria Wien are like also a massive club. They haven't won the league title like just in the last couple of years, but still they're the last club other than Red Bull Salzburg to win the league title here. And theoretically, they're always worried every year about not being given a license because of their massive financial debt, and they're like trying to restructure the club in all kinds of weird ways. They're like bending over backwards every single season just to try and somehow I can't even say balance the books because they're miles away from balancing the books, but just like somehow get away, say, look, we're viable enough. We can prove we're like working towards getting rid of this mountain of debt. And when that's the reality, this like Damocles sword hanging over Austria Vienna. It's easy. I can only imagine that it must have been the same kind of back then for GAK, that this thing was hanging over them, and they're thinking, okay, well, we're still doing well, we're still near the top of the league, but if we don't find some solution, sometimes this is all going to collapse underneath us. And unfortunately, it did.
It did indeed. But I mean, kudos to the fans who decided to set up the Phoenix Club. And then, eventually in 2014, they managed to take on the old GAK name, in agreement with the kind of umbrella association. And now they're back in professional football, and they're in the second tier, and they're battling to get back into the Bundesliga. And it's been an incredible rise back up because, well, you alluded to it at the start there. Normally with larger clubs, if they have a big fan base and they've got more resources, they've got a bigger stadium, then they're always going to do well in the lower leagues. Rangers, for instance, comes to mind as well, a team that maybe suffered a similar fate, although they weren't reformed as a Phoenix club. They're always going to come back up the leagues in a really, really quick fashion. And it seems like GAK have just managed to do the same. But just a bit on the kind of the way that the clubs run now, when the fans reformed them, did they, are they under fan ownership? Were they under fan ownership then? What's changed now about the ownership that's kind of saw them become a little bit more sustainable and be able to hold their own, really? Or is it the case that they might get to the top tier and the same thing will happen again?
It's always a risk. You see with Austria Salzburg is a good example here. The Austria Salzburg is the club that the Phoenix club from Red Bull took over Casino Salzburg, as it was known back then, for sponsorship reasons. They put these sort of safeguards in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. There's no sort of, if you get promoted to the Bundesliga again, it gets financially risky. And the truth is, I don't know exactly about the ownership structure of the new GAK. But I think the fans do have a lot of input. And that's still the case in a lot of the Bundesliga clubs as well, where if you look at the likes of Lask as well, it's not exactly like the 50+1 kind of model in Germany, but the clubs are a bit smaller here, and there's still more, certainly more control from the fans. And you'll get this weird concept in Austrian football quite often where clubs can be quite hesitant to actually apply for promotion. Some clubs who are doing well in the third tier, for example, often clubs who do well in the third tier don't want to move up to the second tier because they're sort of saying, look, as a business, we can't do this. Like as a club, we're going to win the league. We really want to get promoted. But as a business, it's too risky for us next year because if we go and play in the big leagues, like we could be 6 months down the line, our club could be like, we have to close the doors, lock the doors. Same with some second division teams going up to the Bundesliga. So you have this kind of, it's not very nice on a sporting level, but you have this situation in Austria every year where you get to about this point of the year, the sort of top 6 candidates start to emerge. And then you start looking through the newspapers, you start looking through the press releases to be like, actually, which of those clubs could get promoted, which of those clubs wants to get promoted, which of those clubs has the license to go up if they do finish in the top spot. So it gets pretty messy, but GAK are definitely in the situation right now where they want to get promoted to the Bundesliga. It would be good for them, it would be good for us following Austrian football too, because with absolutely nothing against some of the fantastic clubs who have been in the Bundesliga and have done really, really well, a lot of them are really small clubs who are just punching above their weight by being insanely well run and just have, excellent management, really just get the right players at the right time, and they operate on a shoestring budget and they get to the Bundesliga and do really well. So nothing against them at all, but a lot of fans would like to see bigger clubs like GAK back in the Bundesliga. That's a guaranteed, two more Graz derbies every year, like massive clashes, amazing scenes, sold out stadiums, that kind of thing. People want to see that fundamentally. So when the big clubs like Wacker Innsbruck are not in the top tier, Grazer AK not in the top tier, a lot of people want to see them come back, but we know that they want to as well, and they are able to at the moment. So they wanted to get promoted last year. They got so close. We were at the final game actually in Dornbirn, so like way out towards it's miles away from Vienna. It's out towards Switzerland, and it's a long way from Graz as well. It's a really long way from Graz, and they brought something like 3,000 fans away for a second division game. This is like ludicrous numbers for Austrian football, given that there's not much of an away culture. And Dornbirn, the home team, were fighting against relegation. They were just above the relegation places, and all GAK had to do was win, and they would have got promoted and won the league. They didn't manage it. They drew 1-1 on the final day, and lost the league title in the second division to Blau-Weiß Linz, who are now doing a decent job in the Bundesliga. But that was one of the best and then most sort of deflating away days I've ever experienced, because Dornbirn is a small place, miles away, like hours away from Graz, and they took it over. The town was like totally dominated by GAK fans, songs, flares, good spirits, and then the team didn't do it. And I really liked how everybody responded. Everybody was gutted. You know, it was the journey come full circle to go from the 8th back to the top, and they missed out on the very last day. But the fans were all just like that. Everyone was just in tears. Nobody was angry. Everyone was just disappointed. Just like, well, it's been a hell of a journey. We're so thankful that this football club exists and that we'll follow them. We'll follow them in the next years anyway. But it was just this amazing end to a season, and I'll never forget it. They were pushing in the game, they hit the bar, and then they conceded at the end to go 1-0 down, and they knew it wasn't going to happen really. And then they got back in injury time to 1-1, but there was no time left to go and get a winner. And in the other game, Blau-Weiß Linz found a late winner of their own to pip them and go up. So it was a fantastic final day of the season. But in our research for that, when we were looking at that, you know, they would have gone 8th tier to top tier. We found out actually that they have already, like, given that they'd come from the 8th to the 2nd, and they'd already won in their history. They've won the 2nd division and the top division. So we think they're pretty much unique amongst European clubs in that they've won all 8 of the highest divisions in their national domestic league. We don't know anyone else who's done that. Winning all 8, almost. I can't think of anyone who's done that.
Winning all 8. None come to mind for me. I mean, you know, we'll need to look into it a little further, and we certainly will, because if not, that would be an absolutely incredible achievement if they'd managed to do that. And some of those titles they've won twice, of course, as well. So they've got the kind of double honor to their name there. But it would be an absolutely phenomenal achievement if that was the case. I mean, just from what you're
something
saying,
a listener knows. Somebody supports a club somewhere, and they're like, no, when we went down to the 8th tier as well. But most clubs, you know, like in Italy, the big clubs go down, you know, even if they sort of reform completely, they often don't go down as far as the 8th. So it's somebody out there will know more, but we think they might be unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think you could be right. And again, it would be an absolutely fantastic achievement. I mean, from what you're describing there, the scenes, the fans, the passion, you know, you see the photos of it all the time, and the fans look absolutely class. Like, they just look amazing. So much passion and noise and colour. Have you managed to see them at a home game yet? I know obviously you said you went and followed them away there, and that would have been fantastic. Just an absolute roller coaster of a match day. And a heartbreak at the end for GAK, of course. But have you managed to see them at a home fixture yet?
Yeah, we've been out to home fixtures in the league and in the cup, but their home stadium, I mean, it's great. For the 2nd division, the support is amazing, but they play in the same stadium actually as Sturm Graz from the Bundesliga right now. So Sturm Graz, one of the best teams in the Austrian Bundesliga, cup holders right now too. I always think cup holder sounds weird, doesn't it? Cup title winners. I say cup holder, I think of like a little thing that pops out in my car to put a drink in it. But you know what I mean? Sturm are a very decent team. But they share this stadium, the formerly Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadium.
Nice.
Now known as the Merkur Arena, since Arnie had his name withdrawn. But it's like 16,000 capacity, and that's all right for Sturm in the Bundesliga, but it's a bit big for GAK. Obviously, it's the best place to play in Graz. It makes sense that the clubs share to some extent, but the stadium needs a bit of a renovation. It falls into that awkward category. It's like good enough and big enough that renovating it is not an urgent matter. Sure, but it kind of does need doing as well. And they've got their ultras in there. They get really good crowds for the 2nd division, amazingly high above average for the 2nd division. They can bring easily sort of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 fans to their games. But it looks a little bit quiet. It doesn't look empty, you know what I mean? There's still a good atmosphere, but it's not like they're packing out. It's not like because they went down through the divisions, they have this really small ground now, or this like a new small ground that they've built, which Austria Salzburg, for example, have. They've built themselves a little ground that fits their needs perfectly, whereas their stadium is a little bit big for them. so the atmosphere is very, very good, but it's not like maybe the away days are even better, if you know what I mean, because they're just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
filling out those things. But the fans are really great, and GAK fans who listen to this won't appreciate this. But right now, especially given everything that's happened in the last sort of 20 years with GAK, there are more. It's not a 50-50 city divide between Sturm and GAK.
mm,
Sturm definitely sort of dominate. They have the slight they have a larger fan base. Let's be honest, they have a bit of
yeah,
a larger fan base. But GAK are like forming their own, modern. They're forming their own history right now. They're writing their own chapters of history, and in time they might catch up, if you know what I mean. If they do get back to the Bundesliga and they do establish themselves, who says they can't catch up themselves? Because right now I suppose they're still the hipster's choice in Graz, if you will.
sure. Yeah, yeah. They're still the again. They probably won't like to hear this, but in many cases, they will still be the second choice, and a lot of that will have to do with the fact that, well, one, many people from the UK or elsewhere in Europe might not have heard of them because of the liquidation and having to start out so far down the leagues. But then you're kind of nurturing this other generation of fans who are coming up and experiencing something completely different. And some of the away days that they would have went on from the eighth tier must have been absolutely incredible. And I've no doubt that they would have taken thousands of fans to other stadiums and other smaller grounds and teams as well. Is there any
Yeah.
plans for them to build a stadium of their own eventually if they do get back up to the Bundesliga? Is that on the agenda, or given that maybe they want to be a wee bit more cautious financially, and that seems to be a bit of the culture of the league? Do you think that's a bit far off for them yet?
Yeah, it's a bit unrealistic, but the stadium subject is really in focus right now in Graz.
Mm.
And that comes down to the fact that Grazer AK or GAK, they're sharing, as I said, with Sturm Graz, and that's sort of not an ideal position for any clubs, although
No,
it sort of makes sense, but it's also not perfect, of course.
no.
And Sturm have this current problem that they're playing Europa League football, they're playing European football, they're aiming for Champions League, they play Champions League qualifiers, and UEFA announced at the beginning of this season, because Sturm were just in the qualifiers and they were close to the Champions League. UEFA are like, that stadium can't hold Champions League. It doesn't have the infrastructure for Champions League. It
That's
doesn't
rough.
look that bad. It's not like it looks terrible. You wouldn't necessarily see it and think, no way they can play Champions League there. But it's those
Mm.
things like there's not enough space for like you need so many broadcast vans. You need such a big broadcast space for Champions League. You've got to have like dedicated camera positions everywhere with all this space around, all this internet infrastructure, all of this kind of stuff that you need to do like a worldwide top quality stream or broadcast. And that is what UEFA requires for the Champions League, but not for the Europa League. So right now they know they don't have a stadium good enough to host Champions League, and
Mm.
therefore Sturm have kind of been lobbying with the government in Graz for a long time to say, like, look, come on, let's make this happen. Let's like free up some way that we can renovate the stadium or build a new one somewhere. And if they, because this is like a municipal facility right now that they share, if Sturm get enough money to make a new stadium for themselves, I do wonder whether something in the plan would also be sort of carved out for the good of the city, where it's like, look, we'll put down this much money to help you get a stadium, but we'll help GRK get their own place too. If we're going to knock down the one that we've currently got, we've got to take care of both of the clubs that play there. So there could be a sort of medium-term solution that ends up with a new stadium for GRK. But right now, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it's like the stadium is a little bit too good to be a massively high priority and not really good enough to be ideal. So yeah, it's a little bit old, it's a little bit rusty, but like in terms of the Austrian Bundesliga, it's still one of the best, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a solution in there somewhere. I think you're absolutely right. Not ideal to be sharing with your city rivals in any case, and I know, obviously in Italy they do it in some other countries, but for how passionate the derbies can be in Austria, that's absolutely not what you want. And you can imagine that the GIAK fans will want to move back to their own ground eventually. Well, listen, I don't know if where their historic ground was is even standing anymore, or if it's been developed over. The Mercure Arena, I think it was called.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's maybe a possibility for them further down the line, but you'd hope that a solution was found for them so that they could do that, because at the end of the day they might be playing European football before long as well, and it might not be too far off depending on if they can get into the Bundesliga and then make a push for the European places next season, and you'd certainly imagine it was in their ambitions to do that.
They're their historical successes, the things that we talked about, the cup wins, the league wins, that actually, or the league win singular in the Austrian Bundesliga, that actually happened in the Merkur Arena, the Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadion, as it was known back then. So that's sort of their familiar home as well. In a way, that's like that is where the club feel like they belong. So it's not a case of being sort of desperate to get away from that. It's just, it's just an awkward situation in that sense with Sturm Graz. And I think it sort of reminds me, talking about sharing not being ideal. There was a plan in the 70s to do something which is very, very common in Austrian football. And that was to merge the two big Graz teams, because they thought, it's so hard to compete against. Graz is still like, I mean, it's a very big city in Austria, but it's like still, Styria is like a region that can't compare with Vienna in sort of economic interests and things. And back in the day, it was like always the Vienna teams who had all the success in Austria and in Europe. So they thought, a lot of the Bundesländer, like the states here, have thought this at some point. They're like, yeah, why don't we merge our two biggest teams, and then we'll be stronger against the big boys from Vienna, kind of thing. And obviously the GAK, even back in the 70s then, the GAK fans and the Sturm fans were like, they had to really come out against it and say like, no way you are merging our teams. Like, this is not happening. Because it's very common over here to merge sports teams. There's a lot of teams in Germany and Austria with sort of a strange series of letters before their names, or slightly odd sounding names. Yes. And I mean, you know about this already, but yeah, when you look more closely into it, those odd series of letters tend to come from some sort of weird fusion of like an athletics club and a swimming club, and then a football club, and then another football club, and then maybe like a workers club, and then a political club, and they bring them all together, and it's like, oh, here's a new sort of amalgamation team. But luckily, thankfully, Sturm and GAK did not get brought together.
Thankfully not, yeah. Again, mergers are something that we touch on an awful lot, and we've kind of said if it's in the early days of football and they've merged, then fair enough. Clubs had to survive. There was a lot of other reasons for doing it. When you're looking to merge two teams from the same city who have a historic derby, it's not something that I think should ever be on the cards. Just you're erasing so much history and so much identity for a lot of people. But I suppose that brings us quite nicely on to, I guess, other lost clubs from Austria. Are there any off the top of your head that you can think of, maybe to the same level as GAK, who ended up going under, or having the same level of scandal surrounding them?
Yeah, sure. There's actually a bit of a list. Just to touch on one last GAK thing before I move on to the others, I think it sort of rounds off nicely from what you were just saying there about not merging these clubs that have got a big history. And I think it's easy to forget that, like, I don't know what it was like in other countries, to be honest. I only really know from the Austrian history that before the Bundesliga, basically, to some extent, the cup was kind of the only national competition. So much football was played at a state level and at a regional level that, like, the relationship between a GAK and a Sturm is almost bigger than the rivalries of some of the clubs that we might think of in England and stuff, because to those people, in the founding first sort of 40, 50 years of the clubs, they were basically always competing against each other. So it was always Sturm against GAK. We didn't have that like, oh, one was in the third division and one was in the top division or whatever. It was basically just them. And only the winner from there would be eligible then to sort of go on to a national cup or into a European competition or whatever. So it's like, you first and foremost, you had to beat your city rivals forever until the Bundesliga formed and they could compete with everybody from all across the nation. So it's not just GAK and Sturm, but all of these teams in the cities, they've got such a passionate rivalry that goes back to, like, the 10s, the 20s and stuff. And it's, you can definitely see why it's important to keep those apart. But moving on to other clubs, I've mentioned Austria Salzburg a few times today. That's like the Nachfolger, the Phoenix club from the club that was taken over by Red Bull Salzburg. So that's obviously a massively controversial move. That's from 2005. Austria Salzburg are occupying a similar position to GAK now, because they're sort of back up towards the top. They're in the third tier. They've been up into the second tier again. Again, really well supported. They remind me of GAK in that sense. Like for a lower league team, they're really well supported. Got a really passionate fan base who loved them from before the changes. But yeah, they've come up back into the second division in recent years, and then had financial troubles again, and they're struggling with like stadium development, sort of all the difficulties. But they're sort of comfortably at the top of the third division right now, and I hope that they can get their financial situation sorted out, and we'll see them back in the second tier, because they'd be a real enrichment for the second division. There's also, I think there was a bit of a curse. Like anyone who won the Austrian Bundesliga, like late 90s, early 2000s, that period then ended up just being horrible, because you had FC Tirol with
Oh yeah, of course. Yes.
Joachim Löw, little known Yogi Löw as the manager, who scooped up some Austrian Bundesliga titles, and then they sort of fell off the face of the earth.
Mhm.
There's been so much change in Tyrol, out to the west of Austria, a very beautiful area. There has been so much change in the big teams there, but Wacker Innsbruck is like the really big historical name that everyone knows here. Wacker Innsbruck is like one of the traditional heavyweights of the Austrian game. They've had their financial troubles. They were in the Bundesliga a couple of years ago, but they were a bit of a sorry state, down at the bottom end of the top flight. And this is a club who we should be talking about them in the big five. Like, we've got the big five in Austria right now: Salzburg, Lask, Sturm Graz, and then the two Vienna clubs, Austria Vienna and Rapid Vienna. Wacker Innsbruck should be in there for sure. And they're down in the fifth tier right now. They got sort of shuffled down in a reshuffle last season. They finished mid-table, but then got bumped down from fourth to fifth because of it. Yeah, but I mean, in any case, even if they were in the fourth tier, it's like it's not much different. We're talking about leagues with an average attendance of like hundreds, and they're bringing loads of fans themselves. The famous green and black colours of Wacker Innsbruck. So they're really forgotten. That's another story that you could dive into for hours if you want to go and look up Wacker Innsbruck. There's a whole treasure trove of information. But they're such a cool club, and you can only wish them the best. And I certainly hope to see them back up. And then we also had another trophy winner, I think a cup winner from around that time, was FC Kärnten.
Okay.
And what they have,
not one I'm familiar with myself.
Okay.
Tyrol and Isnobrook I've heard of, but this is a new one. So go on, tell us a little bit more about them then. This sounds quite interesting.
FC Kärnten is another, so like Carinthia is the state, Kärnten in German, or in Austrian German, I suppose. They, like FC Tirol, were like seen as like a state team. So whereas Wacker Innsbruck is the team from Innsbruck, of course, FC Tirol was like a merged, let's have a kind of unified representative from the whole state to be stronger. And FC Kärnten was the same. And that's probably why in the end these clubs didn't last too long, because although it was designed to make the club stronger and more competitive, and for a while it worked, in the end people don't really identify with football clubs that define the whole region or that represent the whole region. It's like, it's a nice idea, and all the clubs and the business people behind it and the sporting people behind it, they're probably doing it with good reasons, thinking, yeah, look, we can have, sponsors from all across the region. Well, like, the regions are quite strongly defined here in Austria. You only have 9 states, so like 9 equivalents of counties in the UK. And so each of them has their like a very strong dialect, strong sort of personal, strong traditions in those regions. So I get it. They're saying like, yeah, let's have a team for the whole of Carinthia. That'll be a great idea. And it's hard enough to make money as a small football club. Let's be a bigger football club. But FC Kärnten were very successful for a while, and you have the sort of the hangover from that, I suppose. Not hangover in a bad way necessarily, but the sort of following on from that, now that these clubs are gone, is that you sometimes have still regional academies. So if the clubs in a certain region don't have their own academies, if the clubs aren't big enough to run an academy, you have like a regionally run academy, and then the players from there will sort of separate off to the better teams. But Carinthia is also unfortunately quite famous for having this like white elephant stadium from after Euro 2008, and they had this great stadium in Klagenfurt, the Wörthersee-Stadion it's called, and then the club who were like using that stadium basically folded just before the Euros as well. So FC Kärnten couldn't like take over the stadium. They couldn't sort of attract, it's like a 32,000 capacity, I think, stadium. And the dream of having Bundesliga football there with like 25 plus thousand never came true. And unfortunately the stadium is just used now for occasional gigs and for the annual cup final. The ÖFB Cup final tends to take place there in the summer. But it's been difficult for them to run that club. Even now, like Austria Klagenfurt in the Bundesliga, they've got back to the Bundesliga. They play in that big stadium, but they attract sort of almost no fans. So it's and And they're a great club. They've got Andy Irving, the Scot, who's doing really well,
Of course,
former
yeah,
Hearts
Andy
player.
Irvine, former Hearts player. Yeah, he was always okay for Hearts. You know, there was a player in there somewhere, and then he got his move to Austria, and he seems to be lighting the place up. He seems to be doing really well for himself, which is always good to see. Always do like it when a Scottish player decides to go somewhere else that isn't the lower tiers of England, just to
Yeah.
try it out. So that's been really interesting. It's good to hear that he's doing well. Also,
Yeah, he's doing really well. It's just, like I say, the only thing that's not to like about that club, they're actually punching well above their weight in the Bundesliga. They've got Peter Packult, the manager who he managed Rapid to their last league title. And he's like getting them into the top 6 of the Bundesliga. They're doing amazingly well, but it's just a bit sad because they've got this massive cavernous stadium with nobody in it basically for the games,
yeah,
which is, it's less than ideal, shall we say. But there's a good club in there somewhere. It's just, it can be hard in certain regions of this country to attract a lot of football fans as well,
sure.
because there's so much competition from other big sports over here. The winter sports are the kings really, but yeah, we've got a few Scottish players over here as well. I'm just thinking right now, another team doing great is Hartberg, and we have Ibane Boat playing for Hartberg, I think Scotland under 21 international,
Yeah, name
and
rings a bell.
he's starting to do really well too. So Scotland may be becoming a little destination for young Austrian players. Austria becoming a destination for young Scottish players rather.
I mean, yeah, hopefully so. I mean, it's as I said, it's always good to see, and we've had some imports from Austrian teams over here. I mean, I know we signed him from Stoke. Moritz Bauer comes to mind. Wasn't very good. Played for Celtic. Obviously, at Sturm Graz, Celtic also sent Albion Ayeti over on loan. Not too sure how he get on. He didn't really have a great time over here.
I tell you, the best thing that Albion Ayeti did actually was against GAK. So last season, Sturm drew GAK in the cup. Sturm ultimately went on to win the cup, actually. So a great effort from them. They knocked out Salzburg along the way. But they played against GAK in the cup. So as you can imagine, that was a massive moment on the comeback trail for GAK because
Sure.
it was the first meeting against Sturm for 15 years. So this is it's such a big derby in Austrian football, and they hadn't played it for a decade and a half. And then they got the cup draw against Sturm. And Albion Ayeti actually scored the winner in a very, very tight and cagey 1-0 for Sturm Graz at their shared home. So it was an incredible game. And Albion Ayeti did that. And I think he'll be fondly remembered just for that. But he wasn't great over here.
No, I don't think he's really been great anywhere he's been really, which, isn't a slight on him. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. But as you said, with financial issues, there's a lot of clubs that end up becoming defunct and falling out of the history books. But the 3 that you've mentioned there, the stories are absolutely fantastic, and we really look forward to digging more into them to find out about them. It's like, for myself, following the SPFL, we're always equated as the little brother to England. And I can imagine, in my mind anyway, it's always been the Austrian Bundesliga has been the little brother to the German Bundesliga. Do you find that's the case? Is it overshadowed an awful lot by that?
I think it's definitely fair to say that there's a kind of cultural comparison there. Yeah, certainly. It was lovely that Austria beat Germany 2-0 in a recent international game here. People are enjoying that. People are hoping that Austria can do well as a national team in Germany next summer. But yeah, definitely there's a kind of case that obviously our podcast is called The Other Bundesliga, like a light-hearted joke on the fact that people don't even know often that there is another Bundesliga. But there's so much good stuff to love here. There are some great clubs with traditions. You mentioned, even GAK, a club who are now not even in the top flight anymore. They had this this international history. They played against Inter, they played against Monaco. They beat Liverpool, GAK. We haven't even mentioned that yet. Perhaps their most famous moment. They beat Liverpool at home, at Anfield, in the year that Liverpool went on to win the Champions League in 2005. They're the only club to beat Liverpool at Anfield in Europe that season. And it was a wonderful goal as well from Tokic. You've got to check that out. If you're listening to this now and you want to cue something up for afterwards, check out the goal. Liverpool 0, GAK 1 from that 2004-5 Champions League qualifier. Unbelievable. So, there's great clubs down here, and yeah, there's a lot of good football history, but certainly the prime destination for the players is to go to the German Bundesliga because obviously the players here tend to speak German. The clubs there are local. Salzburg and Munich are hardly a few kilometers apart, really. So it's an easy move to go over to Germany and play, and you can make so much more money. And obviously that's such a Austria's like become a real springboard for players in the last few years. But of course, a lot of the players want to move on and basically play in Germany.
Yeah, which is a shame because it sounds like a brilliant league and it sounds like there's some real quality in it as well. And it's just it's always better with a lot of the smaller leagues, not specifically with the German Bundesliga because the fan culture and the way that fans are protected over there is really good. But it's just a shame that these leagues that are maybe seen as a little bit better from a fan's perspective don't get the attention that they really deserve. And I'd absolutely love to go over and watch a game in Austria. Looks absolutely fantastic, beautiful country, great beer, and a good quality of football as well. We're not talking about some of the doldrums of football in Europe. It's still a very, very good level, and I think that's reflected in how a lot of the teams play. As you mentioned there, GAK beating Liverpool at Anfield 1-0. At the time, it would have been one of the biggest shocks in the tournament. It just doesn't happen. It rarely happens these days. And back then, in that season that Liverpool were absolutely flying, it would have been incredible for them to see. And I can imagine it would have been fantastic for the fans to have seen that as well.
Yeah, GAK actually ended up in one of those weird 5-team UEFA Cup groups that year as well. So they lost to Liverpool in the qualifiers because I think it was 2-0 to Liverpool in Graz and then 1-0 to GAK in Liverpool. So they went into the UEFA Cup. Liverpool went on to win the Champions League, of course, and they were drawn against Rangers in that group. But it was that weird time when you had the 5-team groups where they just drew you randomly home or away against each of the teams. So you didn't play both, and they lost 3-0 at Ibrox. But they won both of their home games and went through GAK to reach Middlesbrough in the knockouts. And Middlesbrough, I think, did really well that season in the UEFA Cup as well. So they have, this is a club with a kind of recent-ish European history.
Yeah.
I think people like to talk these days about the fact that, Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, like a really, really top player, worth a lot of money. He started his career with GAK as a kid because his dad was part of the team to win the 2004 Bundesliga with GAK. So there's like a cool link there with Milinkovic-Savic. I like the fact that I'm a bit of an Arsenal sympathiser. I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I like the fact that Alex Manninger was the first Austrian to play in the Premier League, and he was signed from GAK as well.
It's fantastic. So obviously a lot of good youth prospects coming through as well. How do you see the national team doing? Because I know they've had a couple of brushes with Scotland, and they looked a little bit better than us, but not by a huge amount. And I think it'd be fair to say they've not been up to their best recently. Would that be fair? Have they kind of reached a bit of a blip in how things are going right now?
Yeah, the more recent, the sort of short term since Ralf Rangnick has come in, it's been a bit of an upturn actually. So when Scotland played them, in the last couple of years they've met Scotland a few times. You're right, and they've been always really close games, really good games. But I think Scotland had a bit of a resurgence a couple of years ago, and Austria are hoping that they are going to do kind of the same because the last sort of 4 years have been punctuated a bit by Franco Foda, the previous manager, who had all these attacking players at his disposal and somehow just sort of basically couldn't use them. He was always a very defensive coach. He won the Austrian Bundesliga with Sturm Graz as a very defensive coach. And that's like his philosophy, and it just looked a bit outdated. And then when you've suddenly got all these good attacking players, it's a little bit weird that he wasn't using them basically. So people were getting frustrated. And the last Euros was a real outlier for Franco Foda because Austria did quite well at the last Euros. And they played really bravely against Italy and went out in extra time against Italy, for example. But other than that, the Foda reign was kind of... It didn't bring any fans in. People are not necessarily always behind the Austrian national team here until they do well. People prefer their club football here, really. But then Ralf Rangnick's come in. He was the Man United coach, and then... Man United obviously wouldn't let him tinker with things behind the scenes, but that's what he needs to do. And he got offered the Austria position. And I think it sounds like he was very clear because it's a very old-fashioned football association here. It's all sort of run by the old hands who are like, no, we know how it worked in 1971 or whatever, so we'll do it that way. And he came in and just said, look, I want to be able to change things slowly over the course of time from top to bottom. I want to be able to restructure Austrian football and sort of start a project here, which to our ears sounds absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And like short term, the team's just done much better. Like the players, basically, you've got like Baumgartner, who's doing great in the in the German Bundesliga. There's Alaba, of course, at Real Madrid, like won loads of Champions League with Real and with Bayern. Sabitzer, who plays at Dortmund, he was also at Manchester United. It's just a couple. There's Kalajic, who plays in the Premier League with Wolves. There's basically a bit more depth and quality, just as Franco Foda had at his disposal, but now Ralf Rangnick sort of knows how to work with them and how to use them. So the team's looking a lot better. It was good. The qualification for Euro 24 was really good. Even they drew away in Belgium and lost narrowly at home after like a little spell from Belgium where Jeremy Doku of Manchester City was just unplayable, and they were 3-0 down, and you thought, on another day this could still be 0-0, but Belgium have just done brilliantly, and it finished 3-2. So Austria did all right as well, and they weren't far away from winning the group, which would have really caused them they would have caused a scene and like got loads of attention if they won the group. So almost maybe it's better for them that they didn't, because they finished second, they qualified strongly enough, like, perfect qualification job. A bit like Scotland, really. It's just a really good job, well done. They're through, but I don't think there's like a massive hype or massive pressure on them for next time. So they can look forward to summer. They're playing in Germany. It's close. And I think a lot of people have got, I don't want to say dark horses. They're not sort of good enough really or established enough to be seen as dark horses, but they're definitely one of those teams that if they can put it together at the Euros, they could definitely get to the knockouts and do well. And I think people are enjoying going in without the hype, but with a bit of hope.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's a nice wee soundbite. I like that. Certainly in a similar position to us, but not as shit, to be completely honest. Obviously we've been better in the last 3 years than we have been in my entire lifetime and then some, to be completely honest. But you can still tell that, Steve Clarke's football's not the best, but it gets results. But when you lose badly, and you can see where the kind of key drawbacks are. And one thing that we've been struggling with recently is forwards. Don't have enough forwards. A lot of our youth prospects just aren't up to the required standard, and it's creating a bit of worry, particularly in the goalkeeping position as well, actually. What's the kind of youth setup like for Austria at the moment? Quite hopeful. Do a lot of clubs have a lot of youth prospects they can call on and maybe hope to sell for big money, or is it kind of similar with us in Scotland, where youth players aren't really breaking through at the moment?
No, I think it's fairly decent. We could definitely do with a few forwards as well, actually. Same sort of situation there. Because Kalajic keeps getting injured. He's sort of the youngest one. So we still rely quite often on Marko Arnautovic, who's a bit of an Austria legend. But, ideally you'd have great strikers that are coming in. Basically, Austria seem to rely on their attacking midfielders quite often for goals. Christoph Baumgartner is just been really good, basically. And I'm just trying to think. Sabitzer gets goals, but we could do with some more forwards. But I'm getting confused now, because there's Baumgartner has a relative who plays in the Austrian Bundesliga, who I talk about more, but he's a defender. So I'm like, wait, which one's the really famous one that plays for Austria? It's not that I don't know. I'm just getting the brain confusion. There's Dominic Baumgartner and there's Christoph Baumgartner, but it's Christoph Baumgartner who plays for the national team, and he's really a very useful player, and they're all just sort of finding their feet in Germany, playing really well in Germany, bringing that to the national team. In terms of selling young players, a lot of the Austrian Bundesliga clubs have good systems of bringing through players. Like Rapid Vienna haven't been that successful recently, but they are great at bringing through good players, and they've had like tons of good defenders coming through, players who are getting sold off at a young age to different clubs who are snapping them up because it's quite cheap to buy players from Austria, basically. Sturm have now got a few players who are getting regular call-ups for the senior national team, because Sturm are doing great. They've been Red Bull Salzburg's biggest challengers for the last couple of years on every front in Austria. And then Salzburg themselves, obviously a lot of the great players that Salzburg bring through are not Austrian, but there are lots of Austrian players in the mix with them too. So they are helping to sort of fill up the national team with future generations. And I guess it's not looking too bad right now. And Ralf Rangnick has he's got a strong perspective on like reaching down into the youth game in Austria, and also saying like, look, we need to start, if we're thinking about the Austrian national team in 10 years, like we got to start sorting this out from the ground up. So they seem to really trust him, and they seem to be letting him do that, which is a bit of a surprise to a lot of people in Austrian football. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do start, maybe not right now, maybe not in the next couple of years, but in sort of a medium term, if we do start seeing like a system paying off and getting, more players, more really good players, more top players who are used to playing like modern football. They're talking about taking away all this like results-based stuff at the youth team level, and I know it's a bit controversial, but actually they've been doing it in Germany, they've been doing it in Austria, and it's like it has worked to produce great players because they're not afraid. They're not afraid to play really good football and try and play in a certain way, and they're used to not just playing to like knock the other people off the park and win the physical duels. They're used to doing that and doing the more technical stuff too. So yeah, definitely hopeful and keeping fingers crossed on that front.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like a really good setup, and I think that's what I quite like about Rangnick. And as you said, he was never going to get the chance to do it at Manchester United because the Glazers are just a bin fire at the best of times. But he really likes to not so much take control over everything and overhaul it drastically, but he likes to make these little incremental changes that are just really beneficial and kind of have a say over everything that way. And I think it's really, really good for the sustainability of a national team or a club when people start doing that, and he's got a really, really good philosophy for the game. One last question I had is Guido Burgstaller still getting called up for the Austrian national team? I think he's a great player.
That's a great shout, actually. Guido Burgstaller is playing as the central striker for Rapid, so the biggest, most well-supported club in Austria, the club who have the most pressure to win trophies but have a massive, long trophy drought. Burgstaller's come to play for them. It flies in the face of their sort of great youth policy. They've got so many good young players, Rapid. And then you've got Burgstaller, the veteran centre-forward, who won the Golden Boot in the Bundesliga last year. So he did a great job. He was so reliable. He scored game after game after game. It earned him a call-up because Ralf Rangnick is not afraid of calling up Austrian Bundesliga players when they do well. Predecessors have preferred sort of German Bundesliga-based players who are not playing to anyone who is playing well in the Austrian Bundesliga, but it's not the case under Rangnick. He seems to trust the league here. And so Burgstaller did get a call-up recently, but it didn't quite go according to plan in a way, because it was actually the game where Austria qualified for Euro 2024. So it was away in Azerbaijan. It was an absolutely turgid 1-0 win. It was a horrible, horrible game, but Austria got the win they needed. They qualified for the Euros. So at the end of the day, you've got to just say, yeah, who cares how ugly the game was? They got it done. Burgstaller came on for his, I can't remember how long it'd been. It's been like 5 or 6 years or something. I don't think in the history of the other Bundesliga he played for Austria in that time. So it's been a long time. And then he came on late on in the game and got sent off for 2 yellow cards very swiftly before the end. So he got one for like chasing down the goalkeeper, and then the goalkeeper put the ball down and he tried to sort of kick it because he thought the goalkeeper had played it. And the referee just booked him immediately for that, which was a little bit unlucky because it was quite, he's being cheeky, but it was quite good play. And then he went up for like an aerial duel, and I think he lifted his arm up as he was going in for a header a few minutes later. So he made a very brief cameo returning to Austria with a cap. But he is the Bundesliga Golden Boot winner, so it's not all bad. And the Rapid loved it. It sort of turned into a bit of a meme because it was like I don't know. He came back after all these years and then played like 9 minutes, got sent off, and then Austria qualified 2 minutes later for the Euros. So it was all sort of in good spirits. But yeah, it was very meme worthy. His short and not so sweet return to Austria.
Incredible. I absolutely love it. He just seems like that kind of player that something would happen as well. He is a bit of a veteran now. Is he 34, 35, something like that? Thereabouts.
Yeah, I think so 35, but yeah, one of those two.
He's getting on, but yeah, just absolutely incredible. An incredible player as well. I mean, we've covered so much tonight, Tom, and it's been absolutely fantastic having you on, and we thank you very much. Obviously, you guys are an hour ahead, so it's coming up to 11 p.m, so quite late for yourselves. So I'll let you go and get on with things. For all our listeners, if you haven't already, if you want to know more about Austrian football and some of the fantastic and amazing things that go on there, please go and listen to the Other Bundesliga podcast, where you can listen to Tom and all of his colleagues talk about it every week, because it sounds absolutely fascinating, and they do it a real justice, because it's a league that I think a lot of people often forget about over here when you're looking at other European leagues. But it's one that's just as passionate as others. And as I said at the beginning of the show, some of the football is absolutely incredible. Tom, is there anything that you want to say just before we sign off for the night?
No, thanks. You've done us a great justice there. But yeah, do check out the Other Bundesliga podcast. If you want to come out to Austria and see a game, it's so easy to recommend. You know, it's a short flight from most places in Europe. It's like very central location in Europe. The transport's amazing to get around. It's a super beautiful country. Like the cities, like we talked about Graz today. Graz is lovely. Linz is lovely. Vienna's lovely. Innsbruck's really, really nice. They're all beautiful places. Easy to get between the cities. Quite cheap in comparison. You know, it's not a super cheap country, but like the transport's cheap. It's easy to get around. You can like ground hop super easily. But it's like also a bit of a forgotten country. Like basically hardly anyone does it. It's like people go to other cities to go and watch games, and people sort of fly over or hop over to come and watch games. But I think a lot of people sort of don't have Austria on their radar. But there's so many cool clubs. You know, even if you just came to Vienna, there's like buckets of clubs in the top flight, second division, third division, and down. You know, there's so many. There's different clubs for sort of everybody's taste, really. So it's a really good destination to come and check out some football. So I'd recommend planning it. And it's one of those lovely countries that's like really nice in summer. We get really long, hot summers and really sort of nice, cold, snowy winters as well. So it's like really nice. Whichever season you come in, it's very nice. I'm a bit biased, to be fair, but it's worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, thank you very much for joining us tonight once again. And to all of our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in once again. If there's a topic related to football history or heritage that you want us to cover, whether that's related to club identities, club histories, club politics, new community clubs, or club cultures, just any topic under that banner of history and heritage, please do get in touch. We'd be more than happy to have a chat with you and see if it's something that we can fit on the podcast. You can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. Please also check out our website, which is footballheritage.co.uk. That's where all of our written content lives. Some really brilliant stuff goes up there from our contributors, so please go and give that a read if you've got the time, and support us if you can. And if it's something that you fancy doing, or something that, you know, if there's anything that you want to write about, then of course get in touch with us again, and we'll see if it's something that we can fit in on the website and with the project. But for now, Tom, say goodbye.
Nice one. Thanks a lot. See ya.
And it's a goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.